Meanwhile, let's turn to Michigan. I've seen people complain about the New York Times reporting it this way, and it makes some sense to complain about this. Look at how the New York Times. This is number 3. The New York Times showed this. Now, we should say that President Biden won the state's Democratic primary election, but faced opposition over his Gaza policy, and Donald Trump easily beat Nikki Haley. Now, the irony is that Joe Biden had about 80% of the vote, maybe 78%, and Trump had like 65%. But the reality is that Donald Trump had 45% of the vote in the 2016 primary, and ultimately the other 55% came home.
They'll come home.
Republicans, they just fall in line.
Unless Haley starts messaging quite differently and runs a completely different... I don't think she's saying... like you said, they're going to fall in line.
They're going to fall in line. I mean, it's conceivable. There are some people who are going out and voting for Haley. Maybe they registered as Republicans, or they can go in and open primaries, et cetera, that never had an intention to vote for a Republican in the general election anyways. But they're going to fall in line. If you had told anybody in the total vote tally for Democrats in Michigan was about 750,000. I'm just ballparking this. It's about half of what it was in 2020 in the primary. Now, because this primary, for all intents and purposes, was not contested. I mean, Dean Phillips was really the only candidate in the race besides Joe Biden. Marianne Williamson was on the ballot, but she dropped out in February. Dean Phillips was the only active candidate, and he came in 4th. It was Joe Biden, uncommitted, Marianne Williamson, and then Dean Phillips. But if you had told, and, I'm looking at a piece by Mike Tomasky in the New Republic from like 2 days ago. He anticipated the voting, that the turnout could be closer to like a 1.1 million, 1.2 million based upon early voting, which suggests that the early voting, there were more Republicans who voted early voting than one would expect based upon recent history. Nevertheless, he was saying in that article, if uncommitted was to reach 100,000, like close to 10%, even 9%, that would be a big deal. And in fact, uncommitted broke 100,000 with only 750,000 votes. 3 or 4% more than what anybody would have said 2 days ago would be a big deal. We were talking in the office like 100,000. That seems unlikely.
They said they called about 100,000 people, so you at least got most of those people and picked up some.
I mean, and this was a campaign that, started in earnest, 3 or 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I can't imagine there was a lot of money behind it. And you're going to hear it was because because Biden's older, et cetera, because they don't want it to be about a specific thing that can be addressed. Here is how some of this was pretty impressive. Well, I don't mean it in a good way. This is CNN. They're talking about the primary results. This took place, I don't know, like at around, as the polling was starting to come in. You can see that there was only
6:15 Pacific time.
Yeah, and so 9:15 Eastern time. And you can see that there's only, I don't know, a small percentage in at this point. Maybe like 10% had been counted, if that, or maybe a little bit more. Maybe 15%. But uncommitted was at 16% at this point. It ended up finishing, I think, closer to 14%. But people, 16% was like, what? And here is how CNN was dealing with this.
I don't think for many voters who are voting uncommitted, that they're going to vote uncommitted and then say Donald Trump is my choice. I think this is more complicated than that.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Bakari. I mean, no one that I interface with said that they wanted to vote for Donald J. Trump. There is a however here. And I think sometimes as we talk about this issue, we're centering President Biden. We are centering former President Donald J. Trump when the uncommitted effort is to center the people closest to the pain. And that is the Arab American community. That is the Palestinian community. That is communities that care about peace. And so while this president was in the ice cream shop saying, I think there's going to be a ceasefire, 30,000 people have been slaughtered. People are living in famine. They can't get medical care. So it can't come soon enough for them. And that was really the weight that I picked up on when I was in Dearborn. So we get to be comfortable and talk about this like these people are widgets when they are in fact suffering. And I am young enough to remember, colleagues, when Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and also Congresswoman Cori Bush called for a ceasefire very early on. They were called abhorrent. Now, fast forward to all of these bodies laying in the wake and people who are living through this every single day.
So, by the way, there's also been slaughter in Israel.
I was going to say.
So there's a lot of pain on both sides.
No, I'm not.
I'm not lecture on the problem, but I'm talking about the politics of this tonight. What to you would be a victory, as somebody was calling for this uncommitted vote, what to you would be a victory tonight to get that message across?
I'm not denying that pain. All I'm saying that at a certain point after October the 7th, it becomes clear. I mean, you have a right-wing prime minister.
Right. We don't need to debate the issue.
But you understand, I'm not denying anybody's pain. What I am saying is that this president and our country has the power to say to Netanyahu, we need a permanent ceasefire. The only time hostages...
Reason, though, if I can push back here,
wait, one more point. The only time hostages were released is when we had that brief ceasefire. That is another reason why we need a permanent ceasefire.
I also have to remind people we had a ceasefire prior to October 7th, right? I mean, that's a point. And I get centering people, and I completely understand that. But I think, Anderson, your point is valid as well, that there is a lot of pain to go around, and we cannot forget that. But I'm talking about tangible solutions. That's what I'm, and as we look at because we can debate and talk about this on a level of humanity, which we cannot forget. But we also have to look at the results from tonight. And what I'm saying is that there are tangible results this White House can deliver. And I think if they're able to deliver it, now if they miss, then you have a totally different scenario.
Okay, this is amazing how they're just talking around this, because the politics of this are fairly actually straightforward, but they must go through like why they are voting uncommitted. And to say that there are, both sides, I mean, look, like the story of October 7th is just not as durable as the story of what has been happening for the past 3 or 4 months. And there's increasingly, this makes, I mean, I don't care that Anderson Cooper's out of touch, but this makes the administration out of touch. And how do we know the administration realizes this? Is because the day after these results yesterday, the U.S. is sending a letter and is demanding from Israel. Remember, they did this memorandum a couple of weeks ago, which is already existing law, which is that those countries receiving U.S. military equipment must establish that they're not or must not use these in a way that violates international law. Now, Israel has been clearly doing that. The memorandum came out a couple of weeks ago. The reason why the Biden administration announces today that they're demanding that Israel account and show that they're not using the weapons in a way that breaks international law. The reason why that letter comes out today, or that request comes out today, or that demand comes out today, is because of this. They're in response to those numbers. Now, it's not going to be sufficient, because the reason why they kick it out until mid-March, when does Ramadan start? Is because they're going to allow the Israelis, with no accountability, to attack Rafah. starts in the evening of March 10th. They're basically said, you've got a safe harbor now. You got 10 days to do what you need to do. I mean, this is, if you're going to do the political analysis of this, the question is, will these people who voted uncommitted, not whether they're going to vote for Donald Trump, if you voted for uncommitted in the Democratic Party, you are doing so because you're saying, I don't want to vote for Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump. I want
explicit message.
The explicit message is, I don't want to vote for Donald Trump because otherwise I'll just stay home. And maybe some people did do that. We don't know. But you vote for uncommitted because you're saying, I want to vote for you. But you need to be responsive to our complaints. And then when Nina Turner says, this is what our complaints are, the complaints are, they don't want to hear about it. They just want to talk about the politics of it. It's not just like, this is not just math. There is a reason why people are voting this way. And there are concrete steps that the Biden administration could take to mitigate and to address some of those complaints. Some they won't be able to address because it's too late. But doing this like sort of like the lip service is not going to work because we're going to see this in Colorado. Where's the next one that we were talking to? It was
Minnesota.
In Minnesota. Because what's going to happen with this over 100,000 vote from uncommitted is it's going to inspire other movements like this in these states. And what is worse for Biden and Biden's prospects is if he doesn't react, it's going to be doubly worse. Because now he's been put on notice by people. People made the effort to communicate to the Biden administration this way. And you're going to disempower these people more if you don't respond. This is, of course, like putting aside all of the sort of like basic humanity associated with this and all the polling. This is not a controversial position in terms of all the people that Biden wants to vote for him in November.
Yeah,
it may be a controversial position with, I don't know, what is that, Haim Sabin, or whatever that guy's name is. I'm not joking.
Right, yeah.
That he was fundraising with out in California a few weeks ago.
But this is the you know.
And not just Muslim communities.
No, this is 28% of under age 35 were in the polling. And this is just going to increase. This number is not going to go down. It's going to increase. They just don't get that.